Bad recording. So here I'm going to talk about animal welfare. So I had to back up a couple slides. I got carried away with animal rights. Sorry about that. Anyway, so animal welfare is kind of where most of us stand, I think. I think most all of us believe that animals should be humanely treated and that the laws that exist are meant to support the humane treatment of animals, whether it has to do with, like we talked about animal control or raising poultry or raising livestock for food. I think all of us believe that animals should be treated humanely. And I think that there are many certifying organizations that document that animals are humanely treated. And that is a big deal for many companies, like I said earlier. Most animal welfare, groups, and the idea behind animal welfare is that animal agriculture is okay. It is important to raise and utilize animals for food. And of course, they would support the idea of spay and neuter clinics to reduce the amount of unwanted pets. Okay, so we went through animal rights. We talked about animal welfare concerns, and I told you to make sure you studied that for the quiz. So then we went on to talk a little bit about poultry. Just remember that there are a lot of very poor information about poultry. My advice is always remember when you Google something, if you're looking up, how to raise chickens or is some company treat their animals humanely, you're always going to get and when you Google something, you're going to get the company that paid the most to have that answer at the top of the list. And I think you're aware of that, but you really need to be conscious about that when you're talking about very controversial issues. And there's a lot of in the world of animal rights. There's a huge amount of money that comes from a lot of very wealthy people in the world. That a lot of them are movie stars, and they're people who have never spent a day. They might have a sanctuary, but that's not a farm because they don't have to make a profit because they're already millionaires. So when we talk about producing livestock for food, like chickens, we have to raise them in confinement in order for you to buy affordable food. And when we start talking about their other options, that's nice if you can afford that, like free range or organic or all those little nicknames that we give poultry. And they're great niche markets for small producers. Don't get me wrong, I support that. But when we talk about those options, oftentimes those are far more expensive options than the more majority of people can afford. So it's important to remember that everyone deserves to have safe, wholesome food. And in the US, we do a very good job of that. And we have to remember to keep in mind that we have the USDA there to safeguard our food supply. Another problem that we talk about sometimes or hear about it is the fact that dairy cattle are contributing to the depletion of the ozone layer, and that is the biggest load of crap I've ever heard in my life. And if you believe that, then you need to find a different reading source. I mean, just common sense. Cows do produce methane. The methane comes out in the form of their burps or their farts because they produce a lot of methane. Methane, yes, I said farts. Through the breakdown of fiber in their rumen. But just keep in mind, sheer numbers, the cattle cannot be depleting the ozone layer. They cannot contribute more methane than humans do. In California alone, there's about 3 million cows, including dairy cattle and beef cattle. You got to remember, there's 39 million people who live in this state. Most of them drive cars, and most of them produce far more ozone pollutants in the form of carbon dioxide than all 3 million cows that are roaming around California. So I would just say to people who think that you shouldn't eat meat because cattle deplete the ozone layer, really you need to read a better, more legit source of information before you make a decision. I don't care what you want to eat, but if that's what you're basing your dietary decisions on, you're misled. Just remember that a true fact about ruminant animals like goats, sheep, and cattle, they can take products that can't be used and they can live on ground that can't be farmed. especially goats are extremely hardy animals, especially in developing countries, and they can produce wholesome food that is high quality protein and nutritious for people who have very limited caloric and nutritional intake. So it is important that you realize that animal agriculture is here to stay, and that was one of the first things we learned in this class, is that cattle, for example, cows can eat a lot of stuff that you and I would consider 100% unedible, like byproduct feeds, crop residues, grazing on ground that doesn't require irrigation. And, if you really study some of the regulations we have in our state, as we watch our state burn up during the month of August, September, and October, you might realize that more and more we have restricted grazing on a lot of our timberland. And that has increased the level of brush, and that contributes directly to forest fires. And you can talk to a lot of old-time ranchers, seventh generation ranchers, and they will tell you when cattle were allowed to graze in forest land, there are far fewer fires than there are today. So something to keep in mind. Another impact on animal agriculture is the threat of urban encroachment. So here you can see a subdivision, and it looks like they're drilling a well here and probably going to subdivide the rest of this. And at one time this was, hay production. You might put cows or sheep on this to reduce the, crop residue. It's very difficult to do that when you start to see urbanization, because what urban people a lot of times have a lot of dogs. They don't keep them restrained. If you were to put sheep out here, I guarantee you'd lose sheep to dogs because they kill sheep. It's not the dog's fault. It's people's fault for not keeping their dogs locked up. People don't like the smell, the look, the sound of animals because they're used to living in the city, and they moved out to the country so they could have peace and quiet. So, that is a huge issue, especially to dairies and poultry facilities where they have been there. And in California, we have a law called the Right to Farm. And that has to do with, just because of urban encroachment doesn't mean that your farm can be closed. But that's not exactly how it works, because a lot of farms are closed, poultry and dairy farms especially, because of groups of people that hire expensive lawyers and force dairies out of business because the dairymen they just don't have the money to fight it. So this goes back to what I was talking to you about federal lands. There are many people who feel that livestock do not belong on federal lands. And remember, our theme, the United States Department of Agriculture, is multiple use, and that's good. But multiple use should also include livestock grazing, and that livestock grazing has been pushed out of a lot of, at one time, grazed areas in our mountains, the Sierra Nevadas. This is a good picture of manure management. One of the things in animal agriculture that we have to be aware of is waste management. We talked a little bit about methane generation from dairy cattle waste. So you got to remember, dairy cows eat a lot. They produce a lot of poop. The poop is kind of like a byproduct, and many dairies have received incentives, not so much in California, but in other states, to convert their waste and generate methane. Yes, the same stuff that destroys the ozone layer, which can be used to generate electricity. It can be burned like a gas and used to create electricity, and the dairies can be self-sufficient from a power standpoint. This is a great picture, and I think I have a test question on this. I'll move myself up here. This is just a shift in meat consumption, protein consumption, food consumption in about the last 20 years. So you can see that the light blue is most recent. So red meat consumption has decreased. And, you're going to eat so many calories every day anyway. So you'll be happy to know that your red meat consumption has decreased. Your consumption of sugar and corn sweeteners has increased. Your consumption of sugary drinks has increased. And your consumption of fats and oils has increased. No wonder the world, or the United States, is constantly threatened with obesity issues and all the compounding problems that obesity causes. If you think about lean red meat and fruits and vegetables, that's a pretty healthy diet, and that's the way a lot of people actually lose weight. So it's kind of ironic that red meat consumption has declined, but all of these other things that are documentedly bad for you have increased. This is a great picture too. We'll go through it pretty quick. The first slide, or the first graph, shows you that the most common protein in the average person's diet is red meat. So that is where you get about 50% of your protein intake from. The light blue is eggs, dry beans, and nuts, and then poultry, and then fish. And I think this was interesting, and I found it interesting because I always thought poultry was the number one consumed protein. So your book seems to differ on that. And then of the different types of red meat, you can see that these are red meats because poultry is not in here. Beef occupies about half of the red meat that you consume up here. And then pork and processed meats like bacon, ham, those are all processed meats, hot dogs. Those occupies 22%, 19% by pork, 8% of variety meats, which variety meats would be like liver, sweetbreads, tripe, things like that. We already studied that. So I thought that was kind of an interesting slide. Here's the USDA plate. Notice protein is smaller than vegetables and grains. It's kind of interesting. Protein is your most expensive ingredient in your diet. Maybe fruits and vegetables up there. Okay, so this slide talks about the benefits of biotechnology and what that has to do with animal agriculture. And I'll let you read through these. And basically, it's how biotechnology has benefited animal agriculture. So that is kind of an interesting topic. And there's a question. But I did want to get to the last slide, which I don't know how I got that one that was blank. And that has to do with, I would say, the fallacies about livestock production. I just wanted to go through these in the last 3 minutes of lecture. Chickens are fed antibiotics. That is false. Remember that all animals face a withdrawal period. And if you give an animal antibiotics, it cannot go into the food chain until that withdrawal period is met. Poultry are, as of very recently, in California especially, is very difficult to feed any type of animal an antibiotic. It must be prescribed by a veterinarian, and all antibiotics are very limited use. So that is not true. Chickens are given, given hormones to increase the growth rate. This is absolutely false. There are no hormones available for chickens. Poultry are not injected with hormones to enlarge their breast meat. That's totally wrong. Same with turkeys. The birds have been genetically selected for high breast meat yield. That is why they grow rapidly. That is why their breast meat yield is high. It has nothing to do with hormones. Dairy cows are injected with hormones to increase milk production. False. The use of BST has disappeared. We don't use BST very much because of consumer preference. So that is not true. Dead, dying, sick animals are regularly enter the protein supply for human consumption. Wrong. Absolutely wrong. You have the USDA. They regulate and are there when animals are slaughtered. That is what a USDA veterinarian does. He does an ante-mortem inspection of animals, and he does a post-mortem inspection of animals. And dead, dying, and sick animals do not enter our food supply. They do maybe in developing countries or maybe somewhere else, but not here. Remember that. That's false. Animals are inhumanely handled by livestock producers. That's a lie. If I inhumanely handle my sheep, they could lose their baby. The whole idea of raising livestock is for them to successfully reproduce, to produce offspring, so you can get some income from their offspring. And if you treat any animal inhumanely, it's going to be an inefficient producer. So inefficient, inhumane treatment of animals is not a practice in livestock production. Okay, that's the last slide. Hope you got all that. Okay, you guys take care and have a happy Thanksgiving.